If you are working on a trial and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you are staring wide-eyed in terror at the ceiling, you are probably thinking about recruitment. Recruitment scares us, and it scares everybody who is linked to a trial. Not only those of us who actually work in the trial, but those who fund it, those who are looking at the oversight of this trial, those of us in the department who are not involved in the trial, but it is one of the bits of work that are going on in our unit. And we're terrified of recruitment because irrespective of all the other things that might be bright and shiny and fabulous, recruitment can kill your trial. That's why it scares us. Alone, it can kill it. Other things, I guess that can happen too. They can harm it, they can damage it, they can make it a bit tricky. Recruitment can kill it. And that, of course, is a massive inefficiency. We have a process that is entirely capable of flooring our trial. And I'm going to mention this initiative a few times, and it's called Trial Forge. And one of the things we want to do with that is not only linked to recruitment, but to all of the processes involved in a trial, is to try and be a little bit more thoughtful and systematic about addressing ways in which we can improve a process. Be more confident that this process is going to work in the way we want it to work. And recruitment is right there at the top. If you ask people, particularly funders, what is it you would like us in trial methodology to really focus on? They will say recruitment. And they said that years ago and they say it now. If we think about how many trials there are on the go at any one time, somebody looked a few years ago to try and count up how many trials, new trials, are published every year. And it's about 25,000, give or take. It's a lot of trials. And all, more or less, of those trials need to recruit people. Which makes it strange then that we're not better at it. 25,000 trials, all of them need to recruit, and we're still awake, wide-eyed in the morning, wondering whether we can recruit. This initiative, along with others, is trying to change that situation. If we think about efficiency, there are a number of ways you can cut that cake. Here are two. Both of them are relevant for recruitment. We think about scientific efficiency. Essentially, we need an important question, and then we need to choose the right design for that question. So I'm doing some workshops tomorrow where I'll mention this, linked to a tool called Précis 2. But you can choose a recruitment strategy that can harm the scientific efficiency of your trial. You get the wrong sort of people in the trial, reduces the relevance of the results. But process efficiency is also a problem. We could have a great question, a wonderfully important question. Everybody recognizes that. But yet, we create a recruitment strategy that is very, very hard work. So we have process inefficiency. We might actually reach the finishing line, but we've done it in a way that is very inefficient. And these are the sorts of problems that we need to think about as trial methodologists, and certainly as trialists too, but also as funders and people who look at the governance and oversight of trials. How do we make sure that these two areas of efficiency are as good as we can get them? And again, recruitment is right there at the top, things we can worry about. So let's get stuck into recruitment. What do we know about recruitment? And I mentioned the terror and the reason it scares us. No participants, no trial is what it boils down to. That's why it scares us. This graph, this is from a trial that I was involved with a few years ago. It's a real graph. It actually went well in the end. But two lines that are very familiar to anybody involved with trials. One is expected recruitment. The other one is actual recruitment. And often what happens is this. Two lines that diverge, never to come back together. Now this one, we managed to fix it, but we never brought them back. What we should get better at is projecting our efficiency, our recruitment, and that will make us more efficient. We messed up here because we were optimistic about the ability of sites to start recruiting. They actually did recruit, but they didn't come on board as fast as we thought. We should have been onto that. We should have built that into our projection. So our failure here is not actually to do with our inability to recruit. It's an inability to recruit at the rate that we expected ourselves to recruit. If we'd have thought of that at the beginning, well, actually it's going to take us a little bit longer with these sites for these reasons, we could have built that into our design. We got an extension. We hit our targets. But actually, we could have been better at thinking through the actual recruitment potential at our sites and just built that into our timing. So we wouldn't have needed that extension. We wouldn't have panicked. Well, we didn't panic, but we were scared at the end because you have to go to the funder and then start talking about extensions. And none of us really want to do that, despite the fact that it is extremely common to go back to the funder and ask for extensions. And it's because we're not that good at planning. Just this last week in Aberdeen, we were looking across a whole raft of trials, again thinking about recruitment. Will a site recruit? Will it not recruit? And for many, many trials, we plotted recruitment target against actual recruitment. And what was surprisingly consistent was that the recruitment targets per site were exactly the same. What had happened was, how many people do we need to recruit in the trial, and then divide that by the number of centres. It's silly. You could see a flat line. And then you look at the actual recruitment, wildly different. Some recruited way over target, others much less. And that is poor planning. There was no attempt being made to focus the recruitment target on the actual ability of that site to recruit. And it's not rocket science. It's just to think through. Other trials were much better at it. They were much more individualized. But that sort of thing helps with these curves. They're very familiar. It's a sort of lack of planning. I think we can mitigate it, even if we can't solve it, by thinking through some of these issues. And Sandra's talk is entirely relevant to this issue. Working through some of the challenges to recruitment in this early work. What is the actual rate that we can reasonably expect sites to recruit? How sensitive are these projections to mistakes in our estimates of recruitment? Maybe we can build in a bit of extra time, a buffer. Planning is really important. Now, I said earlier there are 25,000 new trials, give or take, published every year, all of which essentially are going to have to recruit. I've also said that recruitment is really hard, often. So what you'd expect then is that as you as trialists, that if you wanted to say, what I want to do is design an evidence-based recruitment strategy. I want to use components within my strategy for which we have decent evidence that this thing might improve my recruitment. I have reasonable grounds to believe that my recruitment will be improved by using these components. Given that we do so many trials and that recruitment can kill our trial, you would think that people like me who are methodologists would have been beavering away for decades to build up a strong evidence base to underpin this process that is absolutely crucial for the success of your trial and the other 25,000 trials that are currently going on. You would think we would have masses. So this systematic review, which I, together with a whole raft of other people, look after, is looking at those components, those things for which we have evidence, somebody's attempted to get evidence with regards to whether this thing will improve recruitment or not. We're currently updating this one. We have looked at something like 20-odd 1,000 abstracts. And we haven't restricted by time, so we've gone back as far as we can. And if we are very kind, as things stand right now, we could put our hand on heart and say we have decent quality evidence for 3 things that you could embed in your trial recruitment strategy and say that was an evidence-based recruitment strategy. And actually, it's even worse, because of those 3 things, there's only actually one of them that you could imagine applying widely to many trials, because the other 2 things have some other downsides which are pretty substantial. So the pinnacle of methodologists, people like me, contribution to your evidence-based recruitment strategies is this. Now, here it comes, right? If you have posted an invitation to a potential participant to take part in your trial, and that participant has not responded, why don't you phone them up? That is the best contribution that trial methodology has to give you since the time of the Romans. There is nothing that has a better evidence base right now than that. And that is it. Guys and gals, that is it. There is nothing better. Now that is quite alarming, I think, given how many trials are on the go, how central they are to evidence-based medicine, our healthcare systems, and how crucial this process is to a successful trial. There are a whole raft of other things that have been trialed in these sorts of studies. Let's test an intervention to improve recruitment. And generally, those studies are of low to very low quality. There might be one study. It means we end up not being able to say very much about very much at all. It is actually a shocking state of affairs. And this costs. So this is a great study from the States. One academic medical center asked itself, how much money do we spend setting up trials that fail to recruit? So they recognized that they were putting a lot of effort into this. So in a 5-year period, they found 260 trials that were classed or were shut down, and they were shut down because they'd been classed as recruitment failures. Defined recruitment failure as a trial that recruited 0 or 1 participant. So a fairly uncontroversial definition. 0 or 1 participant. But each one of those 260 trials had had all the ethical and other approvals done, that had the contract negotiations, that had the site initiation visits and the site setup, tried to recruit and failed. 260. And they worked out that over that 5-year period, that had cost them just shy of $1 million on 260 trials at one academic medical center in the States. Now multiply that up by as many academic types of centers you can imagine doing trials, and that amounts to a lot of money being sunk on trials that are failing to recruit. And at least part of that reason is because we, I think, as trial methodologists, are not working in an effective and systematic way together with trialists to give an evidence base to people designing trial recruitment strategies. We are forced to use judgment or low to very low quality evidence to figure out what we're going to do in this trial and hope for the best. And that's why I think we find ourselves in the early hours of the morning staring at ceilings. We are not generating that evidence base. Right, so let's start thinking about what might we do. I've talked about one review, Cochrane review, which is looking at randomized evaluations of things that might improve recruitment. And that's good. Good as the starting point. It's not enough. While we were doing that, we found a whole raft of studies which are non-randomized evaluations. And we just keep dumping them. And it just seemed odd to keep doing that. So we started to think, okay, we should look at non-randomized evaluations and see if there's anything in those. And that's good, but not good enough. What we also think is important is factors that influence recruitment. So it's all very well evaluating stuff or dreaming up things that we might evaluate. This might improve recruitment. But actually, there is nothing in that review that is explicitly linked to a known problem with recruitment in a very explicit way. So here is a problem. We've done some work. It could be feasibility work. Here is a known factor that is a problem for our trial. And here is the recruitment intervention we have developed to try and address that very specific problem. It doesn't work like that, really. So that factors review is important. And they should all be linked. Now, one of the great things about all of this recruitment work is that here in Ireland, an awful lot of really cool work is being done in this area. And we'll hear about that in a moment. So this non-randomized evaluation review, I have a PhD student in Aberdeen who's looking at that, Heidi Gardner. So that's published, the protocol, not the actual review, but the protocol is in systematic reviews. So what we actually think for that is we may find, and we've got 120 odd studies we've picked up there, versus say 50 or so for the randomized ones. In our protocol, we specifically say that we may do this entire endeavor and conclude that this type of evaluation has absolutely nothing to offer. It is a complete waste of time. So we say that quite explicitly, so that we can then push the idea that you should not be doing these. We're a bit more optimistic than that. I'm hoping we will find something. But there's a lot of energy put into non-randomized evaluations of recruitment interventions, which are currently not collated. So we want to see whether there's any value, and there might be none. And then we'll push that fact out. Okay? And up in Galway, at the top there, up there, Catherine Horton is doing that factors review as a Cochrane review. And we want to link these together. So we have these 3 reviews, big reviews, lots of work involved in them. But we think they are linked. And we think this is actually a model, not only for recruitment, but for other trial processes. So Heidi came up with this name, because there's 3, a Trinity package. And we quite, in the Trial Forge idea, we just like cool names. So we call them these Trinity packages. We think these are something for all trial processes. We stop thinking about a single review that focuses on randomized evaluations of something, and we think of this trio: randomized, non-randomized, and the factors, and we link them. And we want to start thinking of what happens in one influencing what happens in another, and that they are linked in a sort of circle. Or perhaps a triangle would be a better shape to use. Okay, but these, we think, are an important idea for moving evidence along with regards to processes within trials. And because recruitment is so important, we are starting with recruitment as the first of these. Now, the question to ask, so that all sounds great. How long is all of that going to take? And the answer is quite a bit. There's a lot of work. So the Cochrane review, that's quite advanced. We're updating it right now. That has taken a long time, much longer than it really should. And the non-randomized evaluations and the factors review are both parts of PhD projects. They're substantial bits of work. So what I thought I'd do is, here are some things to think about while all of that stuff is going on in the background, and we hope we can make a contribution. So, but there are things that you can do right now. So here's a list, and we'll work through them. And some are grayed out because I'm going to hop to some other bits of work and then hop back. Now, these are all relevant to what you've just heard from Sandra. So the first thing you need to think about when developing your recruitment strategies: who do I want and need in my trial, and where are they? So there's a rule, a law, I think that's what it's called actually, which has become, it's a problem that is so common that it's got its own name, and it's a cool name. It's Lasagna's law. And this rule or law is this: when we're thinking about recruitment for our trial, before we start, we have an idea of how many patients who have this particular problem come through our clinic or have this issue every week, and that's what we build into our grant proposal. But as soon as the trial starts, all of those patients who we absolutely knew we saw every month, they vanished. So common, that's Lasagne's law. Very, very optimistic planning. Remember those two curves? That's a problem. Failure to be realistic with regard to planning. So think very carefully about who you want in the trial and where are they. And this also has an impact on what I think of as scientific efficiency. So here, and we'll talk about that in the workshop that I'm doing tomorrow. But you could imagine developing a recruitment strategy that brings in lots of people, but actually they're not the people you need for your particular research question. So your recruitment strategy is actually bringing in the numbers, but undermining the credibility of your trial because of some issue of the link between who you need in the trial as far as your research question is concerned and who you're actually getting in via your particular recruitment strategy. So there's a judgment to be made there, and that is something we'll talk about in that workshop tomorrow. And of course, where are they? Again, just to sort of preempt something we're going to talk about tomorrow, is very often we do trials in secondary care because it's easier. There's a clinic, people come to the clinic and we recruit there. But actually the setting that's important may not be the clinic, might not be secondary care but primary care or out in the community. But we choose to recruit in secondary care, and that can adversely affect the scientific efficiency of our trial because we get different people in our trial in secondary care, potentially, than we would had we gone to primary care, which is what we're really interested in. So the where is very important. And these sorts of issues are things you can start to tease out in the feasibility work that Sandra was talking about. Where are people? Who do we want? Can we get them? What's the sensitivity of our recruitment projections to mistakes in estimating how many people we can get per week or per month? What if some of our centres are great and others are really poor? How sensitive are we to that mix? How many centres ought we to get given that uncertainty? This is the sort of thing you can do during the feasibility work. Start thinking about your sensitivity to uncertainty. This is again what Sandra was talking about. The second bullet point I think is very important. Why should somebody take part in your trial? So if you're doing a trial, I heard of a trial manager recently saying, if you're a trial manager, you have to be an optimist. So we're all optimistic because trials can be hard work. So we think the trial is great. However, not everybody may be of the same opinion. It's upon us to make it clear why it is important for somebody to consider taking part in our trial. And years ago, I think it was Richard Smith, who used to be the editor of the BMJ, say that your piece of research, the time it takes a person to contribute to your piece of research, is taking time away from all of the other things that that individual might be doing, like watching the telly, walking the dog, playing with the kids, doing nothing. All of these things compete with your trial or your piece of research. And it is not self-evident that taking part in my trial is better than watching The Sopranos. It's not self-evident. Not always. I've never watched The Sopranos, so for me it's completely obvious that it would be much better to take part in the trial. But the thing is, we should think very carefully about what it is that we can offer to potential participants with this trial, and we should make it as easy as possible for a person to take part in our trial. Now there's lots of work, in fact Declan and I were talking about this yesterday, work about this idea of altruism, and that is a key reason why people take part in trials. Now I think that is important, but I think there's more evidence that suggests that people take part in trials because they believe there is the potential, at least, for personal benefit. So in Aberdeen, we did some work, and this got a name of conditional altruism. So right enough, people want to help, they want to make a contribution, but it's conditional on there being some potential, at least, for personal benefit. And that makes complete sense to me given that there's a whole raft of other things that the individual could be doing. So we need to make a case for an individual taking part in our trial. It needs to be a good case. And we also need to make it as easy as possible for a person to take part in a trial. So one of the interventions that we think is likely to be very important, not evaluated, it would be interesting to try it, is taxis. So we've often thought that one of the problems that people have in taking part in face-to-face visits is getting to the visit. If you think about hospital parking, certainly in Scotland, it's tricky. And if people are, perhaps they don't have the money, they don't have their own car, or they don't have the money or time to figure out bus routes and trains, then it's easy to say, look, I'm just not bothered, because it's going to take me effort. If you say, okay, we will taxi you door to door, that removes a substantial barrier to taking part in that trial. You don't have to worry anymore about how you're going to get from your house to our clinic. We'll taxi you there and back. And that, I reckon, is likely in many trials to be a much more effective intervention than some highfalutin other fancy thing that we might have thought about. And it links to these factors things. What are the factors that create problems with taking part in a trial, and address those with an intervention that targets it? And I think for many trials, things like the ease or otherwise of getting to the measurement point is a substantial barrier, and the intervention is no more fancy or difficult or complicated than a taxi. And perhaps somebody to meet the person and take them to the bit of your very large centre or hospital where the work will be done. Just makes it easy. Now, this is a concrete piece of work that is available now that you could look at, something called Quintet. It's done at the University of Bristol. What they have done, this is a lot of qualitative work. Again, Sandra mentioned some of this qualitative work, basically talking to people, sussing out what are the potential obstacles and challenges and problems that people might face, and also potential opportunities that you could use while thinking about recruitment. Essentially what they do is talk to people, both staff and actual or potential participants, about recruitment to this trial. What are the problems that you might have with it? What do you think about this trial, the intervention? Would you take part? If you didn't take part, why weren't you so keen on taking part? They actually do a lot of work on by recording the discussions that take part between a recruiter and a potential participant, to see if there are things happening in those consultations which might make it more or indeed less easy for a person to take part and agree, yes, I'm going to take part. So they look quite carefully at things that might adversely affect recruitment or indeed help recruitment, a lot of qualitative work. And that is a protocol which describes their process. There's some nice ideas in that. They do something which is quite intense. So they end up having, I think, one full-time qualitative researcher attached to their trials, each trial. So that's a lot of qualitative expertise attached to the trial. And I think there might be ways in which you can cut that down a bit, but that remains to be seen. But those graphs of projected against actual recruitment that I showed earlier, their graphs are much more likely to be together, converged. They think through some of the problems, and also there was one of the questions earlier about the chief investigator site is often much better than other sites, which is true. What they do is they would do work with every centre that's involved in the trial. So the logic there being that there are likely to be challenges and obstacles that are specific to each individual centre, and perhaps we can do something about that. Recognizing that the chief investigator, or indeed even 2 or 3 other sites, may not be representative of the 25 other sites that you need for a full-scale trial. But it's quite an intense intervention. But they get results from that. Okay, let's jump back. This next bullet point: will your strategy work for everybody? I used to know a guy who was in marketing when I was working in Dundee. And what he said, I'm really surprised at you guys. Because what you tend to do, you might have a trial where you hope to recruit men and women from the ages of, say, 20 through to, well, you don't have any upper limit. You might be as old as people want to join, they can join, and you're wanting to recruit people from all different sections of society, and you have one strategy. To him as a marketer, that was very strange. He said in the commercial world, we would look for segments within our population and design strategies according to the segment. So we might be looking for some of those challenges and obstacles for a particular segment of our population. An easy one to think about is somebody like me who's approaching 50 may not be attracted by the same sort of recruitment strategy as somebody who is 17. There's no reason on the face of it to believe that the same strategy will work for both of us, or men and women, or people from different ethnic groups, or different bits of society. So what he was suggesting is that we should be much better at looking for segments within our population and designing strategies appropriate to that segment. There may be overlap, but the starting point is there may well be differences that are important, and we need to tailor the strategies for those differences. So some strategies may work on one component, but not all of them, which means we need several strategies running at the same time. We should use evidence where it exists. Now, I'm not sure how good we are, just thinking about what we do in Aberdeen, that we're as good as we could be at using whatever evidence there is that's out there. So some of it might be of low quality, but if it's of low quality and we are using that strategy, then we might want to reflect on that. So one I can immediately think of, which is not recruitment, but is retention, is that one of the strategies that we use very often as a retention strategy is a newsletter to try and keep people interested in our trial. There is no good evidence at all that that supports retention. It's a very, very common strategy. So there's a work done looking at UK clinical trials units, and that was the number one retention strategy that UK clinical trial units use, and there is no evidence that that is an effective retention strategy. There may be other reasons for sending out newsletters, but if your prime motivation is to improve retention, right now, there is no evidence that that will help you. Okay, so even if the evidence is poor, it might make you reflect that actually, do we really want to do that? And if we do, that leads on to this last point, which Joe mentioned in the introduction, studies within a trial. And this idea was dreamed up here, on the island of Ireland, by Mike Clark and his colleagues in Belfast. If we have an uncertainty about some trial process, particularly if we are using it routinely, then what we should do is do an evaluation. We should embed a study within our trial to try and reduce our future uncertainty in that process. So the one they kicked off with, okay, we have a trial site and recruitment is going badly. We send a senior person out to try and give them a pep talk. They do that routinely, as do many other trial teams. When they started this work, there was no evidence at all that that was a good thing to do, that that would actually improve recruitment. So they thought, okay, well, let's do an evaluation. So they had this protocol for a SWOT, looking at sending somebody out. And then they did the SWOT, and it was a before-after. It's not a randomized trial, but there is some evidence now from a before-after study that this is a useful thing to do. So we now have a little bit less uncertainty than we did before. And the great things with SWOTs is that many of these things are processes we do already. Let's think about the newsletter, and we can build them in to our trial at relatively little expense for most of them. So this bunch of logos is linked to a SWOT on retention, not recruitment, but retention. And it's a cover letter. I'm going to send out some questionnaires to get trial data. You send a cover letter with it, and the idea here is that if you word that cover letter in a particular way, you can increase the chance that somebody will return that questionnaire. So our letter, it's about this long, it's a page, it's no longer than the original cover, is a behavioral change intervention in and of its own right. And it has a small, so far promising, small but useful improvement in retention of a sort of 3 or 4%. Cheap as chips, you're going to send a letter anyway. So what we wanted to do with that is it looks promising. Let's see if other trials would be interested in evaluating. And again, the great thing about SWOTs is you could write a small protocol, as we have, there's a database of these, write a small protocol, and then many trials in many different trial units could evaluate that intervention against the same protocol, and we pool it, and then we have more certainty than we otherwise would have had in a relatively short time. So the problem with that Cochrane evaluation that I was on about, that I look after, was that we have something like, so far, I think it's 45 included studies looking at 48 interventions. In other words, there's generally one evaluation of everything. What we wanted to do here is, why don't we get half a dozen to 10 evaluations of the same thing, pool it, and then see where we are. We think, a much better way, rather than allowing, well, not allowing, we're not going to stop people doing their own thing, but let's focus on some really important ones so we can get better evidence more quickly. Okay, coming up towards the end now. I think we should think about retention at the recruitment stage. And I think that's something to think about. So I think in those conversations that you have trying to recruit somebody is an opportunity to do something about your future retention. So Aberdeen has an interest in retention too, and where we have looked, we tend to find no mention at all of retention in the original recruitment consultation, or discussion rather. And of course, we get very excited and worried about recruitment, but your trial result comes from retained data, people who stay the course. So if you get lots of people in, but a lot of them drop out, you have a problem. So retention is very important, and I think we should start thinking about retention as soon as we can, and start thinking about introducing ideas of what's important to know about with regard to this trial during that initial discussion with a potential participant. And again, this last point, that marketing guy I talked about earlier, he was really surprised at how long trial teams stick with strategies that are clearly not working. So again, he was comparing it to commercial marketing campaigns where they try an idea and they monitor it very, very closely. And if it looks like it's not working, they ditch it or they modify it. But they do that very quickly. He was astonished that we would go for months looking at our graphs, gradually getting wider and wider apart. That would not happen or at least inaction would not happen in the commercial world. They would start doing something. And I think one of the problems here that we have is the fear of the ethics amendment required to make those changes. So one thing we have tried in trials before, well, two approaches. One is we're doing some work with authorities that are charged with approvals. So I think see if we can get some flexibility there with regards to things like SWOTs or changes to recruitment strategies. But another idea is at the initial submission, you think of plan A and B and C and D and E and F pretty much up front. You're going to start with A and B, but you have some other strategies and you get approval for the lot up front as best you can. So that when you realize that A and B, they're not doing too badly, they're not doing what you want, you introduce C immediately. As soon as you can, as soon as you start seeing the divergence, you've got a strategy to go to. And if you're at D, you might want to start thinking about the approvals for G. But it gives you some breathing space to make changes, if you can think of the strategies up front. Another reason why it's a problem that we don't have that sort of list of evidence-based components that you could put into your strategy. Okay, so this is the last slide now. So to summarize then, trials, I think we're quite inefficient with regard to our processes. There is not a great evidence base that we can call upon to inform our decisions for many trial processes, and certainly trial recruitment. There's a shocking lack of evidence that we can call upon to design what we might say is an evidence-based recruitment strategy. And funders are interested as much as anybody in improving recruitment. So some ideas that we might build into trials, I think funders are quite receptive to. So building a SWOT into a trial to support the building of an evidence-based recruitment, funders are interested in that, certainly in the UK, because they see themselves pouring money into trials that are not recruiting as well they might. And anything that can make that less likely, they're interested in. In the meantime, while we do not have a strong evidence base, I think we all should be thinking about things like SWOTs. Okay, we have to make a decision. We have to do something. Let's do that, but let's try and evaluate it too. And if we can get our mates to do it in their trials, so much the better, because then we can build up an evidence base so that next time we know a little bit more than we do now. Thank you very much.